Hello, and welcome to our channel. Today, we're talking about a topic that might seem counterintuitive: why you shouldn't donate your body to science. Now, you might be thinking, but isn't donating my body to science a selfless and noble act? Well, hold on a minute. We're here to share with you the dark side of body donation, and why it's important to fully understand the implications of your decision. You see, while it's true that body donation can contribute to important medical research, it's not uncommon for donors to unknowingly end up being subjects in some seriously scary science experiments. So, if you've ever considered donating your body to science, you won't want to miss this video. Stick around to hear our full story and find out why it might be better to choose a different way to give back. I therefore had to keep this a secret for a long, but I eventually received permission from my attorneys and support from my therapist to post this on social media. You should know that this occurred a year ago. I, 27F, received an internship as a donor services coordinator's office in Spain when I was a college student studying forensic pathology. My initial couple months were all right. I was moving remains from the scene of death to the morgue, the doctor's office, or anywhere the family requested. Now, I received a call from a new small hospital a few months into my internship asking me to transfer a body that was being donated to science for research and other uses. I packed the body, looked up the drop-off location's directions that the hospital had provided, and then I left. Before making the first right turn, the driving was routine. An ancient, rusted gate that was blocking access to a dirt road that was surrounded by thick woods forced me to stop. I called the hospital to confirm that the directions were accurate because the road appeared to have not been driven on in a long time. I carefully opened the gate while using all of my power. I got back in the car and drove for what felt like hours on that road. I felt being watched as I listened to the quiet sounds of the woods and the sound of my tires rubbing against the gravel. I couldn't get rid of the impression, and I kept seeing glimpses of what appeared to be the same figure in the passing trees. He didn't appear to be a person, though. He had a man's body, but his face was covered in a rotten-looking, dark robe. I wasn't able to figure out what exactly made his face seem weird. It might have been his big smile, which contrasted with his dark teeth and face covered in dirt, or his dark eyes, which appeared to be slightly larger than his head. I was finally startled out of my thoughts when I spotted a big, old building out in the distance. Even though I was having second thoughts about where I was going, I was unable to stop. The forest was pushing me to continue, so I did. I decided to take a look around after pulling into the cracked and pothole-ridden parking lot. The unusually wide 5-story building appeared abandoned, and I would have agreed if there hadn't been light shining through the windows, but there was. The bricks were chipped and faded, and the windows were either broken or taped shut. Thin green vines reached out from the woods and snaked their way up the building, as if they were holding it up with all their might. The vines made it appear as if the woods were devouring this place. The fountain in front of the door appeared to be alive. If I had stared at it long enough, I'm sure I would have seen it move. The words "No mires al hombre que sonríe," translation, "Don't look at the man who smiles," were painted on the side of the building in a deep red that looked suspiciously similar to blood. I shook myself free of my thoughts and chalked up my previous experience to paranoia. I stepped out of the car, approached the doors, and activated the intercom. The small box emitted a dark and raspy voice, along with static. I couldn't hear what he said because the static was too loud, but after a few seconds, I heard a loud click and the doors opened. I returned to the car, unloaded the body, and wheeled it inside. Contrary to appearances, the inside was nice and clean. It had white marble floors that reflected the halogen lights, making them much worse. The smell was strong but familiar, like formaldehyde and disinfectant. The only thing out of place was how quiet it was. Again, I stayed against my better judgment. I started following the pristine plastic signs that led to where I was going to dump the body. I arrived at the end of the hall after walking down the long corridor of blinding lights and indistinguishable light blue doors. And there, under the flickering lights, stood the stainless steel slab of hell through which I would walk, changing my life forever. The formaldehyde smell was so strong that I had to cover my nose with my shirt to keep from gagging. I stopped for a moment before reaching for the handle and slowly trying to lift the heavy door open. A strong smell of decomposition and chemicals hit me, making my eyes sting and well up with tears. After wiping away the stinging tears, I looked in front of me and saw stairs, which were extremely unusual for drop-offs. I tried to find a light switch or a string but failed and slipped. Fortunately, there weren't many stairs, so I wasn't hurt badly. I stood up slowly in what felt like knee-deep mud. I felt my way along the strangely smooth, almost slimy walls, trying to make my way to the stairs, but I was stopped by a miracle light switch. I heard it before I could turn on the lights. A laugh, both across the room and directly over my shoulder, echoed across the dark and reverberated off the walls, becoming louder and louder by the second. I forced myself to turn on the light, and there he was again, the man from the woods. I could see even the smallest details of him now that we were illuminated and 12 feet apart. I was frozen in fear as I examined his features more closely. His eyes and smile were the same, but I could tell from this close that what I thought was dirt on his face was actually dried blood, smeared across his face as if he had used it as sunscreen. I could see that the robe was trying to hide a body that appeared to be mummified. When I looked up at his face again, my blood ran cold. I watched as he removed his hood, revealing open wounds, fresh blood mixing with dry blood as if they were in the midst of a battle, and his skull caving in as if he had been beaten in the same spot for hours. Just when I thought this was the last thing I'd ever see, he dug his hand into his skull and began crying. He didn't move a muscle in his face despite the deafening sobs. The same smile as before, but this time there was blood and tears dripping into his mouth and down his face. My panic and fear were finally exposed when I let out the most breathy and loud cry I'd ever let out. My cries echoed through the room, mingling with the man's sobs. I couldn't tell which of my cries were mine and which were his. But then the lights went out and he was gone. There was no trace of him. There are no pools of blood or tears. Or dirt. It took me a while to shake myself out of my stunned state, but once I did, I realized I was standing in a groggy, unfinished basement full of mummified bodies. They had obviously been dropped here or stolen from somewhere else. They were all propped up and arranged in various configurations. Their faces appeared to be frozen in terror, as if they were living and experiencing what I had just a few moments before. I looked down, trying to figure out the easiest way out of the mud, but the presumed mud I was standing in was nothing more than bodies piled up along the walls. Needless to say, I finally listened to my gut instinct and ran. I wiggled my way out from between the bodies, ran up the stairs, and abandoned the body I had brought with me. I could still hear the cries and feel the eyes of the man who did this while running through the sickening corridor. I burst into tears. With salty tears streaming down my cheeks, I burst through the front doors, dashed into my car, and dialed 911. Surprisingly, they believed me, When the police and other first responders arrived to search the basement a few minutes later, they discovered 250 bodies and parts of many more scattered around the floor like toys that young children never put away. The officers decided to search a 50-mile radius around the building. They searched for anyone who could have been responsible, but they couldn't find any sign of life that didn't come from the ecosystems and natural animals of the woods. I was taken to the hospital to make sure that I was perfectly fine, which I was. I was questioned about everything a few days after I was released. I was told to go to therapy, which I have done. The image of that man has remained in my mind, and I have dropped out of college. I returned to Grand Canyon, Colorado, my hometown. I'm slowly coming to terms with what I saw and how to deal with it. As I previously stated, I am now in therapy, which has been largely beneficial. I can still hear that man's laughs and sobs in the dark, see him whenever I'm alone, and always feel watched.